A low, steady hum from the generators tucked behind the motor pool. The faint buzz of sodium lights. Now, and then a loose chain on the gate would clink when a mountain wind came down the valley. Corporal Rios leaned into the cold concrete of the north wall and tried not to think about how tired he was. The air had that pre-morning bite that snuck under his collar, and each breath came out in a thin white ghost in front of his face. He lifted his binoculars and swept them along the ridgeline he'd been staring at all night. Rocks, scrub, the spindly outline of a dead tree that always fooled new guys into thinking it was a man with a rifle. Nothing else. He dropped the binos, rolled his shoulders, and glanced back over the base. Outpost kilns squatted in the valley like a concrete island. Motor pool to the east, operations building in the center, aid station and family housing off to the west. From up here, with the lights glowing and the antennas still, it looked quiet, harmless, almost boring. The latest battalion brief replayed in his head. Quietest post in the region. Low threat. Good spot for families to rotate in for visit days. Good place to rack up uneventful deployment on your record. He snorted softly. Uneventful, he muttered. Sure, great for the career. He checked his watch. 20 minutes to shift change. 20 minutes until bad coffee and maybe half an hour in a chair that didn't lean into the wind. The radio on his chest crackled faintly. Half-heard words overlapped, dissolving into static. Rios nudged the volume down with a gloved thumb and went back to scanning the ridge. That was when the horizon blinked. At first it was just a flicker, a flash he could have blamed on his tired eyes. Then the whole ridge strobed orange as streaks of light peeled away from it, arcing up into the sky. For a heartbeat his brain didn't catch up. Fireworks? Lightning? Then the trajectories clicked into focus. Rockets! Incoming, he shouted, voice shredding the cold air. Incoming! The first salvo hit the outer wall and motor pool with the force of angry gods. A wall section exploded 30 meters to his left, concrete blocks spinning like dice. One rocket punched into the hood of a parked truck and turned the vehicle into a blossoming ball of fire and shrapnel. The shock wave slammed into Rios, picked him up, and threw him on his back like a toy. The world turned white, then red. He lay there stunned, ears ringing, mouth full of dust. For a second, he couldn't tell which way was up. The generators coughed, sputtered, and went dark. The base lights flickered and died, then came back in dim emergency mode, washing everything in a dull blood-colored glow. Then the sirens started. They came from everywhere at once, shrill, ugly, urgent. A base designed for boredom suddenly remembered what it had been built for. Rios rolled to his hands and knees, spat mud, and crawled to the parapet. The radio on his chest burst into a tangle of voices. Contact, contact, taking fire from. Ridgeline, multiple, static, repeat, multiple. All stations, report status. A sharp, metallic whine cut through it all, like someone dragging a fork across his brain. The interference grew, chewing on every transmission until it was just broken words under a roar of static. Jammer, Ridge can't raise. He grabbed the handset, tried to tune it, but every frequency was the same. Mangled voices and that vicious electrical hiss. The next wave hit. Mortar rounds arced over the wall like black marbles hurled by a giant. He watched, horrified, as they started landing in a neat line across the parade square. Boom, boom, boom. Each one walking closer to the operations building dead center of the base. Someone had done the math. Someone knew the layout. Figures scattered below. Tiny from up here. Soldiers sprinting from the barracks, half-dressed, helmets crooked. A squad was caught crossing the courtyard toward the ops building when the first round hit nearby. The blast picked one man up and flung him sideways, his limp body tumbling across the concrete. The others dove behind a low planter, pressed into the thin strip of cover as shrapnel hissed overhead. The planter chipped and spat concrete dust as more rounds landed. The enemy guns on the ridgeline joined in, their muzzle flashes like jagged teeth in the dark. Heavy machine guns laid down long, savage streams of tracers, stitching across the valley into the base. One spray walked right across the main gate, turning it into a moving wall of sparks. The easiest route out of the kill zone disappeared in a storm of bullets. Rios swallowed. His mouth was dry. This wasn't some random harassment. This was coordinated, fast, precise. He tracked one of the Ridgeline guns with his eyes, saw the assistant gunner feeding a belt, the spotter leaning over with a set of optics. Down in the courtyard, someone hadn't made it to the planter. A young corporal knelt in the open, weapons still slung, hands up as if to ward off the invisible storm. She stared at the ridge, eyes huge, frozen between the instinct to run and the knowledge that there was nowhere to run to. She's done, Rios thought bleakly. She just doesn't know it yet. The heavy gun walked its fire toward her, each burst a little closer. Concrete spalled near her boots. Rounds sang past, invisible, merciless. Then something threaded through the noise. One sound, clean and sharp, slipped under the mortars, under the sirens, under the howl of machine guns. Crack. It wasn't the flat pop of a carbine or the clatter of the machine guns. It had weight, authority, the report of a long rifle pushed to its limit. On the ridge, the heavy gun jerked. The gunner's head snapped back. His hands flew wide. The belt rattled loose as his body toppled sideways, tumbling off the rock. The gun stream of tracers flicked up into the sky, then died. For the space of a breath, the air in front of the kneeling corporal went suddenly, miraculously empty. Who the hell fired that? Rios whispered, scanning the wall below him. Another mortar exploded near the ops building, showering the entrance with debris. The squad behind the planter took their chance, two of them scrambling out to grab the frozen corporal. They hauled her between them, dragging her into the nearest doorway as dust and smoke curled across the square. The radio on Rios's chest spat half a sentence. Sniper, confirm overwatch. Who is on that rifle? Static swallowed it. Crack. This time it came a few seconds sooner. The tempo, slightly faster, almost like whoever was firing had found rhythm. An RPG team on the ridge had just shouldered their launcher, lining it up with the base's aid station. Before the man could settle his aim, he stiffened. The tube sagged as his knees folded. He fell face forward, the warhead clattering harmlessly beside him. Crack! The loader behind him jerked backward and vanished behind a rock. Tower 3, someone shouted from another wall position. You up? Tower 3, say again. Rios twisted, squinting toward the designated sniper post. An elevated platform at the corner of the wall, topped with sandbags and a battered spotting scope. Its silhouette was clear against the faint glow of the emergency lights. Empty. No one moved behind the parapet. No long rifle. No observer. We don't have a sniper on the roster tonight, Rios muttered. He knew the duty sheet. He complained about it at dinner. No overwatch. No long glass. Then where? Crack. On the ridge, a man in a darker jacket, likely a squad leader. Based on the way he'd been waving others forward, folded around an invisible punch to his chest and collapsed. The fighters near him hesitated, their momentum checked. The mortars kept falling, but their pattern faltered. One landed shorter than the last, then a little long, as if the spotter's corrections had gone bad. Down in the base, the chaos had acquired a heartbeat. Those single, surgical shots, each one carving out a moment of relative safety in the storm. Rios's throat felt tight as he jammed the binoculars to his eyes and scanned above the walls, above the ridgeline, up toward the jagged spine of rock rising behind the base. At first, he saw only darkness and the dull flare of muzzle flashes. Smoke smeared the horizon, turning the stars into blurry halos. Then he caught it, high above the base lights, perched on a rocky spur that overlooked the valley, stood the old comms tower. Everyone joked about it. Too exposed, too lonely, a lightning rod with stairs. No one used it anymore. Tonight, its top platform wasn't empty. A shadow hunkered against the low wall up there, just barely visible in the red glow reflecting off the base. No helmet, no bulky vest, just a slim figure curled around a long, dark shape braced on the parapet. The rifle's muzzle flared, once, twice. Crack, crack. On the ridge, another machine gun died mid-burst. A spotter's scope flew from his hands. Who is that? Rios breathed. He could see no identifying markings from here, no rank, no name patch. Just the outline of a person who had decided to climb to the most exposed point on the base and start cutting enemy pieces off the board. In the command bunker, concrete walls shook dust from their seams with every close impact. The air stank of sweat, electronics, and too many people talking at once. Major Kellerman, the acting commander, leaned over the radio console, knuckles white. Any station in Overwatch. This is Sunspot Actual, he barked. Identify and report. Who is on high ground? Tower Element, do you read? The comms specialist hunched over his board, headphones pressed tight, eyes wide. Sir, the Ridge jammers are killing everything outside the internet, he shouted back. I've got partial local traffic only. No call sign claiming those shots. Kellerman glanced at the main screen. Grainy camera feeds showed different corners of the base. The courtyard, the motor pool, the family housing block. On one, he watched a squad dash from cover the moment a machine gun that had been pinning them down suddenly went quiet. Then somebody up there is freelancing, he growled. Whoever she is, she's the only reason we're not stacked in body bags already. Sir, the specialist said, thrown by the pronoun. But Kellerman had already seen the silhouette on the tower in one of the feeds, the narrow shoulders, the ponytail whipping in the wind between flashes. He'd read the family roster for the week. He knew who had arrived a few hours ago with a small bag and a worn photo. Someone whose service record had once crossed his desk with a dozen red stamps and a single, quiet commendation buried under them. The rifles outside spoke again. Crack, crack. If this outpost survived until sunrise, there was going to be one question on everyone's lips. This was supposed to be the safest deployment on the map. A quiet rotation, movie nights, and visiting families. So who had just picked up a forgotten rifle on a forgotten tower? And how did a visitor become the only thing standing between Outpost Kiln and annihilation? 17 hours earlier, she had almost turned around at the gate. The transport truck had rattled and bounced the entire way up the valley. Nora Ward had sat near the back, with a metal bed shook the most, one hand on the rail, the other resting on the small, overnight bag at her feet. Dust coated everything, faces, hair, clothes. Kids complained half-heartedly, then fell asleep against whichever adult was closest. A woman in a faded hoodie dabbed sweat from her neck with a tissue and muttered about the heat. Nora barely noticed. Her gaze had been fixed on the shrinking ribbon of road behind them, watching it narrow and twist between the hills until it finally vanished in curls of dust. Once they passed onto the final approach, there was only one way out, through the base. Her chest had felt tight ever since. First visit? The woman in the hoodie had asked, shouting over the engine. First time here, Nora had said. Not my first base. Lucky you, the woman had replied. I still get lost in these places. They all look the same. Concrete and dudes with radios. Nora had smiled weakly and said nothing. As the truck slowed near the gate, the world sharpened. Her hearing tuned into details the others ignored. The rhythm of boots on gravel as guards approached, the hiss of radios on their shoulders, the faint whine of a camera servomotor rotating above the entrance. 2 soldiers had waved them down. One had a clipboard. The other had a sunburn and an easy smile that didn't reach his eyes. Welcome to Kiln, he'd said, as if he'd said the same word 100 times. You folks picked the good rotation. Nothing ever happens out here. When Nora's name came up on the manifest, he'd glanced at the paper, then at her. Visiting Captain Ward, he'd said. Just here to see your husband, ma'am. Just visiting, she'd answered. Her voice had stayed steady. Her hand had tightened slightly on the strap of the bag. Inside the wire, she'd followed the stream of families into the courtyard, through the mess, past the aid station. Everywhere, soldiers had put on their best approximation of relaxed. Clean uniforms, forced jokes, slightly more polite curses. Daniel had burst out of the operations building mid-sentence, still talking into a phone. Yeah, but if Brigade wants those numbers, they can. He'd looked up, seen her, and stopped. Actually, I'll call you back. The phone had vanished. The stiff, harassed officer had been replaced by a man jogging across the yard, dodging a forklift and a private carrying a crate. He'd hug her like she'd just returned from the dead. You made it, he'd said into her hair. You actually made it. You doubted my navigation skills? She'd asked. I doubted the drivers, he'd said, pulling back just enough to look at her. You okay? She nodded. The lie had been smooth, practiced. He'd taken her bag. She'd let him, even though the weight was nothing. It was the kind of thing he needed to do. He'd walked her through the tour he'd rehearsed 100 times in his head. Mess hall, barracks, this is where they pretend I'm in charge. He tried to point out the safe parts, the normal parts. The grill where they held cookouts. The lounge where they did movie nights. The playground where a handful of kids kicked a flat soccer ball. She'd watched everything else. The flicker of a status light on the main repeater antenna, blinking in a regular pattern. The empty mount where an observation drone should have been hanging. The maintenance gate at the back where a civilian truck was reversing out, its tires leaving distinctive marks in the dust. Comms look unhappy, she'd said casually over lunch, nodding toward the antenna visible through a window. Daniel had shrugged, tearing bread. Repeater's been glitching, he'd said. We're working on it. Worst case, we relay through the next outpost. It's an annoyance, not a crisis. And your drone? She'd asked. One lightning strike, and it folded, he'd said. We're waiting on parts. It's fine. We got eyes on the wall, patrols in the valley. Like I said, low threat. She'd let it go. She'd also watched the way he favored one leg when he walked, a leftover limp from a roadside blast 2 tours ago. She'd watched the way some of his junior soldiers glanced at her, then away, as if they half recognized her from stories they weren't supposed to repeat. In their quarters, she'd opened her bag and taken out the old patch and gloves. Daniel had leaned in the doorway and tried to talk about anything except the last time she'd worn them. That conversation had gone sideways quickly. By the time the sun set, the air had thickened with the smell of grilled meat and dust. Strings of lights flickered on over the courtyard. Kids darted between legs, chasing a ball. Someone had wheeled a big speaker out and was losing a battle between music and the generator's drone. Nora had stood on the walkway, looked at the ridgeline, and seen that single, suspicious glint of glass. She'd traced routes on the wall map with her fingertip while others argued over board games. She'd listened to distant thumps in the night and counted the seconds between them, her mind mapping trajectories without permission. And finally, when she'd lain in the dark, staring at the ceiling with Daniel's arm heavy across her stomach, she'd tried, really tried, to convince herself it was just a quarry blasting rock somewhere in the hills. She hadn't believed it. Not fully. But she wanted to. Because the last time she'd listened to that instinct, people had died. Because the last time she'd been behind a rifle, a call she'd made in the chaos between civilians and combatants had saved one convoy and destroyed her career. Because out there, in the world she'd left, it was easier if she was the one everyone quietly agreed had walked away after that deployment. Now she was here, a guest, a spouse, no rank on her chest, no rifle in her hand. In the early hours, those distant thumps had faded. Silence had settled over Outpost Kiln. It had lasted until just before dawn. Then the ridge had lit up. The family lounge that night smelled of popcorn and old couches. A movie glowed on the TV. Something loud and harmless. Explosions carefully divorced from reality. Kids lay on sleeping bags, eyes wide. Adults cluster laughed at the wrong moments, their nerves showing at the edges. Nora sat near the back, where she could see both the screen and the door. Daniel had ducked out midway through the film, his phone buzzing. 10 minutes, he'd said, leaning down to kiss her forehead. They just want a quick check-in from headquarters. I'll be right back. Don't eat all the good popcorn. What if it's all bad? She'd asked. Then say be the least bad, he'd said and gone. When the first rockets hit, the images on the screen didn't make sense. The film's explosion cut to black a half-second before the real blast shook the room. The floor jumped under Nora, hurling soda cups off tables. The walls groaned. The lights flickered and went out. Someone screamed. Somewhere in the base, a siren tried to start and choked. A heartbeat later, it found its voice and began to wail. The second explosion came closer. The lounge windows rattled in their frames. Glass cracked. Nora was already moving. Down, she snapped, voice cutting through the confusion like a whip. Everyone down now. She grabbed the child closest to her, a boy she'd watched playing soccer earlier, and shoved him under the nearest concrete support pillar. His mother scrambled after him, dragging another kid. Adults stumbled, tripped over chairs, froze. The third blast sent a shower of dust down from the ceiling. The emergency lights flicked on, bathing the room in dim red. Nora belly-crawled toward the center, pulling at sleeves, shoving people toward the thickest parts of the wall. Inward corners, she snapped. Not the windows. Away from the glass. Another explosion. The glass in the lounge blew inward, spraying across the empty chairs she'd just cleared. Shards clinked harmlessly onto the tiles. The bass net blared from a radio near the door, clipped to a sergeant's vest. Multiple impacts, motor pool, taking effective fire from Static Ridge. Repeat, I say again, this is Sunspot 2, mortars walking in, request static. The sergeant fumbled for the handset, trying to answer, but that high, electrical whine shrieked across every channel. The words dissolved. Nora heard something in it. Not just random interference. A pattern. A moving, shifting wall of noise that followed certain frequencies. Jamming. They have jammers up. No drone. Weak repeater. Maybe compromised maintenance schedule. She shoved that aside and focused on the room. Everyone against the interior wall, she shouted. Away from the windows. Keep your heads down. Ma'am, you need to get down too. The sergeant snapped on reflex, then caught the look in her eyes, and for a second, remembered where he'd seen that face. Just stay with the others, okay? He didn't wait for her answer. He bolted for the corridor, radio squealing. Nora crawled to the shattered window and risked a glance outside. The courtyard had turned into someone else's war story. Dust clouds rolled across the open ground, lit from below by fires. Figures darted from cover to cover, some still pulling on vests and helmets as they ran. The motor pool burned, flames licking at the sky, sending up oily smoke that caught the first hint of dawn. She saw the mortars walking in, pattern-tight, around the operations building. She saw one burst throw a man across the steps like a rag doll. She saw Daniel. He was sprinting from the ops building toward the command bunker, helmet in one hand, radio handset in the other. His mouth moved, shouting into the mic. His legs pumped, closing the distance across a stretch of exposed pavement. The heavy guns on the ridge found him. A line of tracers swept across the road ahead of him, gouging sparks from the concrete. He slid, changed direction, dove behind a low concrete barrier that might as well have been tissue paper against that volume of fire. He didn't get all the way. She saw him jerk, stumble, then drag himself the last meter into cover, leaving a smear of something dark on the ground. Daniel, she breathed. He went down behind the barrier and didn't come up. Another rocket slammed into the ground a few meters from the barrier, throwing dust and debris into the air. When it cleared, she could see his legs sticking out at an odd angle. Another soldier, further away, lay too still, arm reaching toward him. In the distance, the aid station doors flung open. Medics spilled out, dragging stretchers. A burst from an unseen gun ripped the air nearby, chewing the steps in front of them. They flinched back, pinned. The loudspeaker system crackled, then cut in. All families and non-essential personnel proceed immediately to the designated shelter areas, a strained voice said. Repeat, all visitors to the... Static. The voice dissolved. An older sergeant pushed into the lounge, face set. All right, move, 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 he barked. Everyone to the bunker now. Stay together. Keep your heads down. Let's go. People surged for the hallway, clutching kids and bags. Nora let herself be swept along, eyes going back to the courtyard every chance she got, trying to spot Daniel again. She saw only smoke and the occasional flailing silhouette. In the bunker, a reinforced space under the family block, the air felt too close. People packed into the room shoulder to shoulder. A medic shouted for space as they cleared a corner for the first wounded coming in. Nora stood on tiptoe, trying to see over heads. They carried Daniel past on a stretcher minutes later, his skin too pale, his uniform soaked at the thigh and shoulder. A tourniquet bit into his leg. His eyes were open but glassy, lips moving soundlessly. She reached for him. Daniel. A medic blocked her. Ma'am, we need to get him to the aid station, he said, already moving. We'll stabilize him. Stay here. You'll be safer here. Safer. The word rang hollow as more impacts shook the ceiling. The bunker had its own radio set, secured in a steel mount bolted to the wall. A young specialist hunched over it, trying to raise someone. "This is Shelter 1. We've got multiple wounded. Hello." The reply came as pure noise. Nora could make out fragments under the jamming now, like voices underwater. 40 minutes out. Jammer truck, high ridge. Need someone with eyes on? Mortars boomed closer. The bunker lights flickered. On a bench near the far wall, a little girl sobbed quietly, clutching a stuffed bear. Her mother stared at nothing, lips moving in silent prayer. A man who'd arrived on the same truck as Nora paced, running his hands through his hair. The senior NCO who'd brought them in, Sergeant Major Duran, stood near the doorway, keeping people back by force of presence. "No one leaves this room," he said, loud enough to carry. "No exceptions. Visitors stay put. We'll handle it." His eyes swept the room, daring anyone to argue. Nora slipped closer to the radio. The specialist's hand shook as he turned dials. "Sir, I can't. The jamming's everywhere," he said. "I can't reach anybody beyond a few meters." "Keep trying," Duran said curtly. Nora listened to the murmur under the static, the occasional word breaking free. "Ridgeline owns the whole base. Enemy forces moving toward Ops building. Intel vault, crypto. Need overwatch. Any shooter with. Need overwatch." Her hand went to her bag, even though she knew there was nothing in it. Her gaze lifted to the bunker door. Above it, green paint peeled from an old sign. "Emergency exit. Access service corridor." To the right of that, another sign, smaller, almost forgotten, pointed down a side hall. "Tower access / utility tunnel." She stared at it. Images lined up in her mind without asking for permission. The old comms tower on the rock spur, the blind spots she'd traced last night on the wall map, the glint of glass on the ridgeline, the mortar rounds walking neatly toward the Ops building. If someone was dropping rounds that accurately, they were using spotters and pre-registered points. If someone was jamming the net that effectively, they had specialized gear parked on high ground. And if someone was going to change anything about this geometry, they'd need height. Angle. A place from which the ridgeline stopped being a wall and became a row of exposed targets. Her thumb rubbed unconsciously against the scar on her palm, the one she'd gotten the day of the incident. The last time she'd ignored a feeling like this, people had died. The last time she'd obeyed an order instead of her own math, a convoy had walked into an L-shaped ambush she'd predicted and flagged, but been told to stand down on. The last time she'd fired through civilian clutter to stop a man raising a radio, they called it unfortunate collateral. They'd needed a name to attach to the mistakes. Hers had been convenient. Nora. She blinked. Sergeant Major Duran was watching her. "Ma'am," he said, "I need you to sit with the others. Let the medics do their job. We've got protocols for this." She glanced at the medics, already overwhelmed, pressure bandaging wounds, trying to calm people down. At the radio that wasn't reaching anyone. At the emergency exit sign. "Your protocols didn't plan for this," she said quietly. His jaw clenched. "Ma'am," he repeated, more steel in it now. "No one leaves. That door is locked for a reason. If you go out there, you'll just be one more person I have to haul back in a bag." The bunker shook with another impact. Dust fell from the ceiling. Someone on the net, buried under static, yelled something about enemy fighters moving toward the operations building's secure wing. "Crypto. Keys. Intel. They're not just trying to scare us," she thought. "They're trying to blind the whole sector, maybe grab a senior officer for a camera." Daniel lay somewhere above or under fluorescent lights, blood leaking into bandages. Nora looked back at Duran. "Sergeant Major," she said, "if I can get to the tower, I can see that ridge. I can see whatever's jamming you. I can make it stop, or at least make them duck." His eyes narrowed. "You think you're the first person who's wanted to run up there and play hero," he snapped. "That tower's a magnet for incoming. We pulled it off the defense plan for a reason. Which is why they're not looking at it," she said. "They think you're too cautious to use it. They're using the gaps you left. I know those gaps. I saw them on your map last night." "What are you, some kind of intel officer?" he demanded. She hesitated. "Former marksman," she said. Long gun. 8 years. Different unit. He stared at her, searching her face, old rumors clicking into place. The story about the sharpshooter who'd left in the middle of a career. The friendly fire investigation. The unresolved question of whether she'd been right or wrong. That was you, he muttered. Right now, she said, it doesn't matter who I was. It matters that you have wounded leaders, a jamming truck on the ridge, and no one with height who can see the whole board. He opened his mouth, ready to shut her down. Something outside screamed. Not human. Metal. The bunker lights dimmed, surged, then steadied. The radio coughed up a half-clear sentence. Anyone with eyes above the wall? We need overwatch. We are pinned. Nora took a step toward the emergency exit corridor. Duran put out an arm. I can't let you, he said. I can't explain to your husband that I let his wife run out into an artillery barrage because she thought she knew better. She looked him straight in the eyes. If I stay, she said, voice low but steady, you will be explaining to a lot of husbands and wives why no one did the one thing that might have changed the angles. He swallowed hard. Responsibility weighed different on people who'd watched names go on walls. He dropped his arm. You don't go alone, he said. You take a radio. You keep it on. First sign of you getting pinned, you fall back down that tunnel. You hear me? She nodded, even though they both knew that if she committed to going up, she wasn't coming back down until either the ridge was quiet or she was. Duran yanked a heavy key ring from his belt, thumbed through it, and pulled out one old, brass key with flaking paint. Old structures, he said. Tower included. Maintenance stopped going up there months ago. If the door's stuck, you kick it. If it doesn't open, you turn around and get back here. She took the key. It was warm from his body heat. Copy, she said. He grabbed a spare handheld radio from a plastic crate and shoved it into her hands. Channel 3, he said. Internet. The jamming slider on it. If you get line of sight on that ridge, you call out any movement, understood? And if you see an opening that keeps my people alive, you take it. She nodded, clipped the radio to her belt. As she turned for the corridor, the little boy she dragged under the pillar in the lounge looked up at her through a gap in the crowd. Are you going to help them? He asked, voice small. Nora managed a smile. I'm going to try, she said. Then she slipped into the concrete hallway, the bunker door heavy as a bank vault as it swung shut behind her. The muffled thunder of the battle followed her into the tunnel like a distant storm. Up ahead, somewhere above the snarling ridge line and the walking mortars, the old comms tower waited in the dark. And on the far side of the valley, the enemy adjusted their positions, confident that they owned the high ground and the net, unaware that someone they hadn't planned for was already moving to the one place they'd agreed no one would be crazy enough to use.